Bonjour et bienvenue dans l'entretien de France 24.
Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is the new UN and Arab League representative for Syria, Mr. Lakhdar Brahimi. Sir, thank you for having us in your Paris apartment. Now, wherever there seems to be trouble in the world, you are there to find solutions, be it in Haiti, in South Africa, in Afghanistan, Iraq or Lebanon. Now, are you confronted with the mission impossible this time around? Well, all assignments are difficult, and this one is no exception. And sometimes you hear people talk of a mission impossible. Of course, this particular assignment is especially difficult. Now, you thought long and hard before you took over from Kofi Annan. What were the questions you put yourself, and did you have any questions for Kofi Annan himself? Well, of course, I did have qualms. It's a great honor, of course, that I should be called upon. It's also a great surprise to me. I'm no young lad any longer, so I was surprised to be called upon, and of course I had to talk to a great number of people around me. I had to talk things over with my family to begin with Kofi also, with some of my fellow elders. And what did Kofi Annan have to say to you? Well, Kofi said that he expected them to call on me. Well, I am, of course, quite conscious of the difficulties that lie ahead, but it was very difficult to say no. At the end of the day, when you're asked to help out in a situation as complex as this one, when there is so much suffering and injustice inflicted upon a people, well, even if you don't know that people, that particular people, it's difficult to say no. Now, I didn't really hesitate, but I did have to think long and hard about it. Now, a diplomat stated to the Reuters agency that you had qualms given the difficulties within the UN Security Council. Well, of course, the UN Security Council and its difficulties won't make matters much easier, and I harbor no illusions. I never expected that it would suffice to ask nicely for a consensus. Have you talked to all 5 permanent members yet? No, not just yet. I'll be in New York next week. And as I'm sure you know, France is currently chairing the UN Security Council. I am in touch with the French ambassador to the UN, and I will be holding talks, not just with the 5 permanent members, but with all members of the Security Council. So this Sunday, the military mission of 300 people will be packing their suitcases to be replaced by a 10 times smaller civilian mission. What will this mission have to do? Well, I don't know. I'm all for a light footprint, as it were. I don't believe in big missions, and I don't think one is necessary here. Now, in Damascus, well, let me put it this way. I think the function generates the organ and not the other way around. This is not about setting up a 50-man team and then finding something for them to do. First, we'll find out what needs to be done, and then we'll send in the right people. Now, I think in particular, from a political point of view, well, I would say that we need to bring about the possibility of a serious dialogue. A serious dialogue between whom and whom? Well, between all parties concerned. And who is that? Well, we're about to find out. That's a difficult task set out for you. The opposition is very divided. I suppose that's why you're not answering my question directly. The biggest problem, perhaps, is that, well, those who were hoping for a truce for the end of the Ramadan will have been very disappointed, and by now both sides seem very belligerent. Yes, unfortunately. Well, a civil war is always, well, I would say it's the most cruel form of conflict there is, when when people start killing their neighbors or indeed their brothers. That is the worst form of conflict you can imagine. Now, a lot of people say we need to avoid civil war, but I think we already are in a civil war situation and have been for some time. And all we need to do now is put an end to that civil war. Now, this won't be anything easy to achieve. Now, another matter is the following. You know, in the early days of the Arab Spring, if you want to call it that, I had already said that this wind of change and of aspiration for change would blow over all Arab countries, although it would take a different form in each one of those countries. I also said back then that every government in the Arab world had here an opportunity to steer that change, failing which they would fall victim to it. And there you have it. Now, Syria is no exception. Change cannot be avoided in Syria, and I'm talking here about a serious change, not a cosmetic makeover. I'm talking about a fundamental change. I heard the certain ambassador mention the legitimate claims of the Syrian people. Well, those claims have to be satisfied now. Must Bashar al-Assad step down? Well, we'll see. We'll see about that. Bear with me. Give me some time to take up my new responsibilities. I've already heard in the media people almost say that I am in favor of Bashar al-Assad staying on. The time has not come to talk about that, in my opinion. When Laurent Fabius, the French Minister for Foreign Affairs, last Friday in Turkey, stated that Bashar al-Assad did not deserve to tread this earth, having seen what he'd seen in the refugee camps. Does that make your tasks more difficult, that kind of statement? Well, France is a great country, of course, and I can only respect the point of view of France's Minister for Foreign Affairs when he says that Assad does not deserve a place on this earth. Well, listen, I'm not going to start passing judgment on every person who expresses their opinion on the Syrian situation. No, I will, of course, talk with the representatives of the French government in New York and possibly, or even certainly in Paris also, and we will say to each other what we need to say to each other. In the meantime, I respect the opinions of all governments in the Arab world or throughout the region and elsewhere. Now, as you've just made clear, your job is to go out and talk to everyone. Now, the last UN report has mentioned atrocities on both sides, but does not seem to treat them on equal footing. Do you believe you'll have the leeway to put your fist down if need be? Oh, well, that's easy to do. You know, the point here isn't to get personal gratification and to shout out that you're for this or that or the other. No, the goal here is to help the Syrian people. We must do everything we can to help the Syrian people. If putting your fist down at some point is helpful at all, then I'll have to do it. Let me talk about Kofi Annan. His departure is very clearly a political move in favor of the Syrian people, because Kofi Annan publicly stated that it was of the essence now that we stop just pointing fingers at each other and that we needed now to develop a common position to support the Syrian people, rather than to try to score points and wave fingers at each other. I think Kofi Annan's departure was very clearly a political move in favor of the Syrian people. And now will things start moving in the UN Security Council? Well, I certainly hope so. You'll be in New York next week. I will too. And again, I harbor no illusions. Change will not be brought about from one day to the next, but that will clearly be one of the goals that we need to work on at the UN level. And indeed, the UN are working to that end, even before I joined the group. Now, Mr. Brahimi, my last question is the following. You said that the the last time you were in Damascus was in the 1950s. You also said that the Arab Spring would be very different from one country to the next. Well, did you expect things to go this way in Syria with such a bloodbath and civil war? No, certainly not. You know, one of the defining traits of the Arab Spring was the surprise that it represented everywhere. With every new event in the early or in the later days of the Arab Spring, I think one common trait of all those events was the element of surprise. Nobody expected Ben Ali to step down so quickly, or Mr. Mubarak. Nobody expected all the events that occurred in Tunisia or in Egypt after that. And no one certainly expected what's happening in Syria now. Now, Syria harbors the same sort of mosaic of communities and religions as we see in the neighboring Lebanon. Are we headed towards a situation similar as that in Lebanon? We'll see. You know, Syria stood in the past as an extraordinary example of coexistence, what the Arabs refer to as muwatana. This feeling of national belonging. Well, in that respect, Syria stood out as an example. You know, in 1958, I knew people in Syria, and I couldn't tell you for my life who was a Christian, a Muslim, a Shia, or an Alawi. For very long, that's what Syria was all about. And I certainly hope Syria will not lose that in the future. Well, you worked in Iraq in the past. Do you have hopes that we won't go the same way as in Iraq? I certainly do, but I cannot tell you. Well, thank you, Mr. Brahimi, and thank you for having been with us for the France 24 interview. Stay with us for more news.